Ridley Podcast. What do you guys want to say?
We should be applauding you. Thank you so much for coming out to see us. Wow.
Again. You realize
that without you, we wouldn't be here.
Exactly. I would be on doing
55 years later, we wouldn't be here. Thank you so much for your support of our program.
55 years. It's crazy. Who would have thunk that this little movie that you guys made would have such an impact and stand the test of time this long?
The only one of our group who claims,
Oh, sorry.
the only one of our group who claims that he was clairvoyant enough to realize that 55 years after the fact, we would still be getting together to talk about Night of the Living Dead is John Russo. The rest of us, frankly, from George on down, had no clue. We were just a group of young, energetic filmmakers who decided that they didn't want to do TV commercials anymore and business films and that kind of thing, that we wanted to make a real movie. And the real movie turned out to be Night of the Living Dead.
So this is such an iconic, legendary, revolutionary film. Let's go back to the beginning of you shooting it. If you remember, do you guys have any recollection of the first scene you got to shoot?
We know exactly what it was.
Actually, the opening sequence of the car, which is supposed to have Barbara and John, was actually Gary Streiner and me, because there was no close-up of us. So we were the ones in the car chatting about this and that, everything. And so that's something, I don't believe I've ever shared that.
I never knew that.
Yes.
Wow.
You heard it here first, folks. And what about you guys?
I think my first shot, I was running in the woods. And I had bare feet, or at least one bare foot. But yeah, I remember running in the woods and then running along a road where George Romero was in the trunk of a Lincoln Continental. The bonnet is up and he's filming as I'm running hell-bent down the road.
The first dialogue sequence was the cemetery sequence between Johnny and Barbara. And that was the very first day of filming, along with the other shots that they're mentioning, with Gary driving the car with Judy in it. And we didn't get finished with the cemetery scene the very first day. And so we kept putting it off, the finishing of that scene, kept putting it off and putting it off and putting it off. So consequently, it was the very first day of filming and it was the very last day of filming. And in between time, about 3 months had elapsed. We started filming in early June of 1967, and it was getting into October, about this time, maybe even a little bit later, in October, by the time we finished filming. And this was southwestern Pennsylvania, where the weather is slightly different than it is here in Texas. Between June 1st and let's say middle of October, by the time we got to the middle of October shots, that these scenes had to be edited together. It was cold and it was rainy, and we had to be careful because sometimes you could see vapor coming out of our mouths, which is hard to work around. And it was also threatening with rain. So we had to do something to cover whether it was actually going to be raining or not. But you don't need to know all of that minutia, but coincidentally, that cemetery scene embodies both the very first day of filming and the very last day of filming.
And what does it feel like to be part of such a pivotal movie now that you saw what it grew into, and it means so much to so many people for the last 55 years?
It feels kind of surreal. I was 9 years old. Can you hear me? Yeah, I can hear you. I was 9 years old when we shot the film, and of course, as Russ said, never entered my mind that I would be sitting here 55 years later. You know, like, this stuff didn't happen though either at that time, so none of us could have, except for Jack, could have foreseen where we would be now. But I feel honestly like I'm one of the luckiest people on earth. I really do. I mean, I was a 9-year-old kid plucked out of like my life for, not for very long, for like a day or two here and there. And like out of all the billions of people on planet Earth, I'm here for this, and it's like, how did I get this lucky? It's amazing, because it really is like, the word blessing is so overused, but honestly, that's how I view this. It is a blessing, and I wouldn't be here meeting all of you really wonderful people. You guys, come on now. And it's amazing. It's fantastic. I'm lucky, and I'm so grateful.
Explain the rigorous casting session that you had to go through.
Oh yes, I woke up one morning and my mother said, "You're going to be in a movie." I said, "What?"
Just get
Dad's
there,
doing a
Sonny.
movie. So I go, "Okay, what am I going to do? I'm not an actor."
Not yet.
So, still not. So, but it was, it was amazing, and even I was able to lie on a table and die. So, if I can do it,
Well, I worked at Leading Image, and so I saw George and Russ and Jack every single day. And I actually did read for the part of Barbara, but as I've said on other occasions, I was dreadful. And they wrote this part. I guess they needed a lighter, younger couple in the film to kind of round things out. So, and they knew me and they liked me, and that's how I got to be in the film. And through no talent of my own, really. I just happened to be in the right place at the right time, and they were all just great people. Everyone there was just. I look back on them. I'm very happy that it was part of my history, and I feel very fortunate to be here. Not something that I ever imagined, and I put it off for a long time. And it was my children who said, "Mom, you really need to do this." So that's how I came to be a guest at one of the. I think it was Dallas was my first show. Yes.
Like Fix a Streiner.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
To have this be a legacy it's awesome to me. I always, since I was a little girl, wanted to be on the stage, wanted to perform. I'd sing and practice before I could even go to school and read. And to actually, at 23 years old, be cast in her first feature film was a thrill. Every minute we were there, whether it was in the middle of the night or the middle of a hot, hot day in the summer. We gave it 150, 200% or more of our love, our energy, our desire to make something that we never thought it would go beyond, but we wanted to make make something good with what we had. We wanted to do the best we could do with our own knowledge at the time. That's what we did. It has changed my life incredibly. Let me give you one example, if I may. Not only have I acted on the stage and on screen, but I've also had a communications company where I've helped executives stand up and present. I have taught a lot of those executives and engineers over the years. What I found, and this blows my mind, I would come into the first class. We had 6 classes in this whole the whole course. I'd introduce and say hello, and it was so nice to have you, etc., etc. Somebody would say, were you Barbara? Yeah. And I'd say, how did you find that out? Yes. Do you know from that time on, people that the attendees seemed to listen a little bit harder. And maybe she has something of value to give. Maybe, after all those years. That truly is how it affected me, that it would change these adult executives and engineers. Oh God, were you in my little It is a gift you have given all of us, and I thank you. Thank you.
I first met George Romero roughly 10 years before we made Night of the Living Dead. And I met him through the most odd circumstances. George grew up in the Bronx in New York, and he came to Pittsburgh to go to Carnegie Mellon University, then Carnegie Tech, as a painting and design major. And a mutual friend of ours, Ridley, Rudy and I were in a performance, live performance at the Pittsburgh Playhouse, which at the time was a very, very active community theater nationally. And we were in some silly farce comedy. And Rudy wanted to bring his friend, Rudy was also in the painting and design program, and he was doing acting in the evening. And he said, I'd like to bring a friend of mine over to meet you guys, George Romero. But he's a little bit strange, but he didn't explain exactly how strange George was. So, George had a knack for falling in love with movies and with movie characters. And at this point in time, he happened to have fallen in love with a movie called Cyrano de Bergerac, Jose Ferrer playing the lead character in Cyrano. After the show, into our dressing room, Rudy and I were sharing a dressing room with a few other people, comes George Romero dressed in a black satin cape with a red satin lining, spouting lines from Cyrano de Bergerac. Magnificent, my nose. And he had all the dialogue down, and he would work his way, not that particular night, but he worked his way through characters. He landed on Marlon Brando, and Brando was one of his favorites, everything from Viva Zapata. So depending on what movie was in George's favorable list at the time, you might find yourself talking to Marlon Brando or Cyrano de Bergerac or you name it. But that's how I first got to meet him. And a few months later, George contacted me and said, I'm making a movie, which was his first 16mm movie. I knew nothing about movies, and I mean literally nothing. I didn't know which end of the camera you were supposed to point. But he wanted me to be an actor in a movie called Expostulations, which I did, and the very first day of shooting, I became enamored with the production process. And George and I started to hang out, and about 10 years later, we completed our first real movie, being Night of the Living Dead.
Let's open it up to the audience. Do we have any questions? Oh, come on, don't be shy. Now, I can't see the back row, so I'm going to stand up. No? Really? Okay, there we go.
So, it's just a little tiny thing, but like, when you pull the emergency brake on the car to release it and it crashes into the tree, was the car already damaged, or did y'all wreck the car?
I did. Russ wants to jump right in. Since you were looking at me, I get the first.
You were behind the wheel.
I was behind the wheel. You're absolutely right. That car belonged to Russ and Gary's mother. And they said, Mom, we're going to borrow the car for a little while. And I really told her what we were going to do. We did not, now you'll have to correct me here, we did not injure the car. The car was damaged, the
Prior to, well, as I mentioned before, the cemetery scene was both the first and last day. And there must have been probably 3 months span between those dates. My mother was driving her car back and forth to work, obviously, during that 3-month interim, and someone crashed into her and wrecked her car. So Gary and I persuaded her, don't get it repaired just yet, because we have to figure out a way to stop the car in the movie that we're making. So you can pick it up from there.
because of course we had filmed the beginning of that scene when it's all whole and clean, and yet we finally come back after the crashed car. To me, the way George filmed that was so wonderfully done. When you look at it, I don't know how many times, but I swear that car was damaged by the tree that I ran into. It was so well choreographed. And that's how we got rid of the crash. It was the Streiner's car.
The only thing that we did, my mother obviously knew about the damage and so forth, and then she eventually got her car repaired. I wish that we still had that car. I wish that we had the foresight to put it in a plastic bag. It would be a very valuable gift.
Jack Russo would have.
Or we would have put a car that looks like it and said that it's it.
The thing that my mother didn't know is that she didn't know that when Bill Heinzman, the cemetery ghoul, was trying to get after Barbara, that the passenger side window was going to be broken by Bill Heinzman slamming a rock into it. She didn't know that until she saw the movie in the movie theater the first night, the premiere of Night of the Living Dead. My brother Gary had the wits and foresight to, before the filming, he went to a scrapyard that was not too far from our house, and he bought a replacement window. So we were able to pull a fast one on my mother, replace the window before she knew anything happened to her.
Oh, yes.
the premiere. Do you guys have any memories from the premiere? Did you get to attend?
Oh, golly, yeah.
Yeah.
We had limo, come pick me up. So excited. My hair at that time was as long as it was in the film. Because, of course, all that time had passed. But we were allowed to invite just a few select friends. How exciting that was. I can remember that night holding that drink, talking to Dwayne, laughing. But what's most
55
exciting?
years ago tomorrow will be exactly.
Yeah,
That's right.
55 years, tomorrow night.
I have one. I was almost 11 when it premiered, and the day of the premiere, a bouquet of roses, a dozen roses arrived at the door. And like for an 11-year-old girl, like, whoa, what is that? You know? And my mother answered the door and took the delivery of the flowers. And I said, "What are those?" And she said, "They're for you." And I said, "Are they from Dwayne?" I wanted them to be from Dwayne because I loved Dwayne. And my mother said, "Oh, yes, I think they are." So she let me believe for my whole life basically. And then somebody years later said, "No, those weren't from Dwayne. They were from Image 10."
That's nice.
But that was my big memory of that day. And I found pictures of myself on that day. My mom took with me with the flowers, and in a vase, and it's just like amazing. And I still remember that feeling of those roses. It was, they're from Dwayne. These things, no.
My parents and I went in the limo, and I remember my cousin and her husband were invited. And at the premiere, Richard Ritchie, who isn't in the film, but he figured prominently in our lives because we knew him and we worked with him. Anyway, he was rather flamboyant, and he had on a black cape with a satin lining. And as my cousin and her husband were approaching the door, he opened it for them, and she thought he was the doorman. Knowing Richard, that was something that we all found very amusing. And I remember that, I believe we went to the pilot house afterward, and that's where there was a kind of an after party. And it was such a special night. None of us had imagined the pageantry. I mean, the entire city of Pittsburgh was all caught up in this and everything. It was really wonderful. It was a great night for everyone. Wow.
If I may, we came back on the 50th. We had another celebration, another screening of the film on the 50th anniversary back in Pittsburgh at what was the Stanley Theater, but is now the Byam Theater in Pittsburgh. It was as surreal and wonderful and as exciting as the original premiere was. I can remember standing on that stage with my arms out thinking, oh my God, we were here 50 years ago. A lot of good memories over those years.
Again, you have to remember, I think it was Rudy Ritchie, a friend of ours who I mentioned that I was in the show with. Rudy was a very, very talented writer who unfortunately squandered most of his talent as a writer. He felt, although he was a close friend of ours, he felt that Night of the Living Dead was beneath our intellectual capabilities. He looked at it as a B movie, and he was a little more high-minded about what we should all be doing with our careers, completely overlooking the fact that this was our first time out of the gate. And if we didn't treat Night of the Living Dead seriously, probably no one else would. And that's why Carl Hardman, who was Kyra's real-life father, John Russo and I decided that we were going to, Carl and I co-produced it, and obviously Russo was the co-writer with George. If we didn't treat it seriously, probably nobody else would, including the media. And that is one of the reasons why we made such a big hoopla out of the opening. It was the first complete feature film that was filmed in Pittsburgh. And we were able to rouse up enough media interest in, of all things, a horror film. But that particular spectacular launch of Pittsburgh's first full-length feature film did indeed pay off. The one downside to the premiere was that my grandmother was in the audience. She knew that we were working on a film. She had no idea what the subject was. She just knew that we were making a movie. So, here's her grandson, Russell, in the first 7 or 9 minutes of the film, getting into a tussle in the cemetery. And out of the dark, there were 1,400 people at the premiere, and out of the darkness you hear this little grandmotherly voice when Bill Heinzman and I were fighting, "Russell, he broke your glasses." The reaction from the live audience was exactly the same reaction that you just provided. So, my grandmother did not, I don't believe she saw the rest of the film. That was her. Russell got his glasses broken, and then his head hit on a tombstone. Forget it. Grandma Streiner is out of here.
I don't know if I'm able to answer this question, but it's about the main character played by Dwayne Jones. Up until then, we didn't see like a whole lot of strong African-American heroes portrayed on the screen. And so my question is, when Russo and Romero wrote the screenplay, did they intentionally write the main character as a black character? And if so, were they trying to make a statement about racism and something like that?
No, not at all. And yes, I'll defer to Russ because he has far more detail. But that never came into play. In fact, it was just a generic writing of a truck driver, I believe, at that time, to play the role. How Dwayne got the role is, I don't know if you've heard that story before, but I'll turn it over to Russ. He knows the details. Dwayne, bottom line, had the best audition of all the people who auditioned for it. And there were good old white boys in there auditioning too. Dwayne was the best, and we wanted the best.
That's awesome.
I've mentioned a few times the name Rudy Ritchie, and he was a close friend of ours, and it was kind of, and Rudy was also a pretty decent actor. And it was assumed by us and by Rudy that Rudy would probably play the character of Ben. Except, as I said before, Rudy had this kind of disdain for the genre. And his disdain came through, and even though he was a friend of ours, we decided we were going to look at other people to play the character of Ben. Dwayne Jones grew up in a suburb of Pittsburgh, but we didn't know him at the time. He grew up in Pittsburgh and then moved off to New York. We had a mutual friend by the name of Betty Ellen Hawhey, She knew Dwayne in New York, and she knew us. Easter Sunday, Easter weekend of 1967, Dwayne was coming back to Pittsburgh to visit his family for Easter. And through the good efforts of Betty Ellen, knowing both Dwayne and us, arranged for him to audition while he was in Pittsburgh over that Easter weekend. And as soon as Dwayne read, we knew that he had to be Ben. And even Rudy agreed, and Rudy voted that Dwayne should be the Ben character, and it was on that weekend that he was cast.
Did you ever see the version that came out after you were colorized? It was brought out in color, and did you see that, and what did you think of it?
I did see it, and a very long, painful, convoluted story about the loss of the original copyright to Night of the Living Dead. Under the copyright law that would prevail in 1968, if you put out a book or a record or movie, whatever, without a copyright notice on it, you lost your copyright forever. That law has since changed. And Night of the Living Dead was one of the reasons why the copyright law was changed. The title, I told you it's a little long and painful. When Night of the Living, or when Latent Image first decided that we were going to do a horror film, a scary movie, nobody knew exactly what it was going to be. So our business manager, a guy who really kept us together, a fellow by the name of Vince Cervinsky, he opened a job jacket at Latent Image called Monster Flick. So that was technically the first name for Night of the Living Dead, but obviously as a Monster Flick, not very commercial. So we attached a working title to it called Night of the Flesh Eaters. And as publicity started to come out about this group in Pittsburgh is making a movie called Night of the Flesh Eaters, we get a cease and desist letter from an attorney saying, my client has a movie called The Flesh Eaters, and stop using it, you're confusing the public and this and that and the other thing. Well, we didn't want our first movie out of the gate, we didn't want to start off with a series of lawsuits. So George suggested, why don't we put a title on it that nobody knows? We put a title on it called Night of Anubis. Anubis being one of the Egyptian gods of the dead. So the very first complete print of the movie had the title Night of Anubis along with a copyright. Okay, fine. We take it out and try to round up a distribution deal, which we did, but the distributor said, Anubis, what the hell is Anubis? Nobody's going to come to a movie called Anubis. Get out of here. And that's when we put the title Night of the Living Dead on it. And it was their responsibility, the distributor's responsibility, to put the copyright that was on Anubis, put it on Night of the Living Dead, and they failed to do that. And that opened 50 years of nightmares for us, to be honest. But that's how the long, painful story as to how Night of the Living Dead got released without a copyright on it. And we didn't see any of the distributor's prints until the night of the afternoon of the premiere. We're looking at the movie. Where the hell did the Anubis copyright go? It's gone. And it was absolutely too late to do anything about it. So here we are. We made these big plans for an opening premiere, and the distributor's first prints come in without a copyright on them. So that, again, long, painful story.
We have time for,
Hello. We have time for one, possibly two more questions from the audience if we have them out there. Way in the back, yeah. You, yes, that's one.
Casting the ghouls, how'd that go?
How did casting the ghouls go?
gee,
Um,
I don't know.
Do you have any insight on that?
By the time, as I said, George and I, through the Latent Image and through Hardman Associates, we had pretty good reputations in Pittsburgh for doing productions. We recruited a lot of our advertising clients to be ghouls. And it became kind of a social statement. Have you been invited to be a ghoul yet? What's wrong with you? I'm going to be a ghoul. I'm going to be a ghoul. And to be honest, we had all of the ghouls that we needed, and all the ghouls got paid $25, but many, many, many of them were our real-life advertising clients, not only of the Latent Image, but of Hardman Associates as well.
And a lot of the others you see in the background. My father was in it, my English teacher's father, a gourmet cook, the owner of Pantoff Ford. We had anybody and everybody. When George said, we need a few more bodies for the posse scene we're going to shoot tomorrow, would we just call up your bridge partners or your golf buddies?
Yep.
About a favorite memory of on the movie with George or Dwayne?
Favorite memory of working with George or Dwayne? Or both?
Go.
Stop looking at me.
Yeah. I remember the night that my dad got shot. That was fun. Because he didn't really die, so, but I was out there the night that they did the scene between Dwayne and my dad. And my dad, you know, when like the shot would go off and my dad would try to stumble down the stairs, but he kept getting caught in that coat tree and it kept following him, you know, around the corner. And how many times did they redo that scene? And everyone was laughing like hysterically. I don't know how anyone kept a straight face during the final, scene that they did, but it was very, very funny. So when I see the scene, when I was younger, it used to bother me seeing him shot, but now I harken back to that ridiculous coat tree incident and like repetitive coat tree incident, and it just makes me laugh now. So people think I'm nuts when I laugh when I see my dad.
That was one of the longest dying sequences filmed in the movie. He's going down the stairs.
I don't remember a lot of amenities at the farmhouse, and it was bare bones. And I remember that if you needed to use the bathroom upstairs, you had to go down to the creek and fill a bucket with water, and then bring it up so that the next person would have, a flushable toilet. And I also remember that the crew, George, and I think George included, I don't really know this for certain, they would spend the night in the farmhouse, and when there was going to be several days of shooting, and they would sleep in sleeping bags, because getting a hotel or a motel room was a cost that nobody wanted to incur. So if you could possibly get yourself home, I remember driving home, and I think my parents found me the next morning asleep on the glider. That's as far as I got. I was so tired, and I did actually get to bed. But we did everything we could to keep costs down, and that included everyone just living this film. just devoted to it through whatever means were necessary. So that's my report.
For me, George's creativity, the older I get, the more often I see the film. I see what he brought to it that helped make it the unique film that it is. Funny man, easy to work with, at least I found so. He gave us actors a freedom to be in a scene. He said, here's what I'd like to accomplish. We don't have much dialogue, but if you want to improvise, you can. So we did improvise some of the dialogue. There was a great deal of freedom, which you didn't often have, especially in a stage show or something like that. But he also taught me how to load film cartridges in a black bag. You know, when you're away from the studio and you have to have that film stock ready to go. He taught me how to do that. I was scared to death that I would make a mistake and we'd ruin some of the film. Didn't have film to ruin. But what a memory that was of his showing me how to work in that bag, getting that thing all wrapped up. Fortunately, we didn't lose any stock.
To follow up on, some of us spent nights, I didn't spend too many, but George and John Russo and a few others did spend nights in the house. First of all, we didn't have security, so somebody had to keep an eye on all the equipment and so forth. George was lucky. He didn't have a sleeping bag. He had a cot. And our nickname for George was Bocat. And now remember, George was 6'4", a large guy. He took a look at the cot and he said in a silly voice, "This cot don't hold Bocat." Well, he tried for a few nights and guess what? The cot didn't hold Bocat. Collapsed under him. And he ended up sleeping on the floor. But George and I were friends and business partners for 60 years. And if you want to come by our table and see some of the memorabilia from the film, photographs mostly, I will show you George's actual sunglasses. When he passed away, his widow wanted me to have some personal items of his, and I have one of those personal items with me, and I'll be happy to show you George's actual Goliath sunglasses.
Wow. I think that's the best way to end this. Everyone give it up.
Thank you. Before everyone runs out, I sincerely want to tell you that we made the best film we could with what we had available at the time. But it's you all who have made it a classic. So we genuinely thank you.